Vayhi b'shalach paro et ha'am. So we have a clause that expresses time. Okay. It happened when Pharaoh let the people go. Shalach. Okay. Beshalach, we have an infinitive of the double stem of the PL. Beshalach. The bet preposition has various uses. One of these uses is to show actions that to show the time of an action. Okay. When. Hence, Beshalach would be here when Pharaoh let the people go. Okay, remember Moses comes to Pharaoh and says, Shalach et ami. That was the later on adopted as kind of the slogan that led Jews to demonstrate against the Soviet Union, which blocked people, Jews included, and maybe even specifically Jews, from leaving the Soviet Union. So the demonstrations held signs back in the 70s, 80s, that called Shalach et ami, let my people go. So finally, when Pharaoh let the people go, using the same language, the same of the request of letting the people go, God did not lead them through the way of the land of the Philistines. Velo Nāḥām Elohim derech eretz Pelishtim, ki karov hu. And we have a few interesting things here. So we have a parenthetical clause, if you will. Okay, a circumstantial clause, parenthetical clause. God did not lead them, okay, through the land of the Philistines. Ki karov hu. What is the word ki is used for various purposes, but what is the most common intuitive translation for the word ki when you see it?
Because.
Guys? Because. Right. But here, is that the meaning of the word ki? God did not lead the people, okay, lead them through the land of the Philistine because it was close?
No.
No. Right. Here we have a less common use of the word ki, and the use of the word ki here is essentially even though, okay, it is translated more like although or even though, okay, a concessive conjunction. We do have it in other places, but it's not a very common. Okay, so ki karov hu here, even though it is near or nearer, because the Hebrew, one of the ways of the Hebrew to express comparative is simply using the adjectival form. Karov could be near, it could be nearer. That's we have ways to be explicitly comparative. Karov mi, or karov, or gadol mi, using the preposition min. And we've talked about the preposition min and its use as a comparative maybe the week before last, okay? But one of the ways to express comparative is simply using the adjective. So the adjective can be used without any morphological distinction as a comparative. Okay, so we can have the word karov being both near and near, or the word tov, good as well as better. Okay? We may have the preposition min, or proclitically just the preposition mem, when added to the beginning of another word. Okay, explicitly making it comparative. Okay, but it doesn't have to be there. Sometimes you won't have that particle, that preposition min, explicitly making it comparative, and still it is comparative. Now, this understanding of biblical Hebrew may affect exegesis, may affect commentaries. Some commentaries would say, no, basically, because it was near, God did not choose it. And then they have to explain why this is, why the fact that it is near is actually not an advantage. And it completely changes the meaning of the text. Okay? Are you looking at the proximity of the land of the Philistines as an advantage or a disadvantage? If it's an advantage, you have to explain why. Okay, and then you understand it as even though or although. If you understand it as a disadvantage in this specific case, you have to explain why it is a disadvantage. Okay, so that's this parenthetical remark of Velo Nāḥām Elohim derech eretz Pelishtim, ki karov hu. Now, the next use of the word ki is also different. Ki amar Elohim pen yinachem ha'am bir'otam milchama v'shavu mitzrayma. So, here the key is opening a content clause, okay, or opening not a content clause, but an explanation clause for God said. And literally, Amar Elohim means God said, but contextually, God thought, God considered, God weighed that possibility and came to a different conclusion. Okay? Pen yinachem ha'am bir'otam milchama velo nacham Elohim. These are of two different roots. They sound somewhat similar, Nāḥām and Yinachem. Okay? But they're of completely different roots. Nāḥām, nun chet mem, nun chet yod, I mean, and Yinachem, nun chet mem. Very different. Nāḥām has the third person masculine plural pronominal suffix, marking God did not lead them. The root is nun chet yod or nun chet hey. Okay. And Yinachem has to do with the relenting, returning from something, regretting about something. Okay, so Yinachem, talking about the people, third person masculine singular in the Nif'al, Yinachem, and maybe the people would change their mind, would regret. Bir'otam milchama v'shavu mitzrayma. When they see a war. Again, we have the same preposition bit that we had at the beginning of the verse. Okay, we had beshalach, and now we have bir'otam. In both cases, we have the bet followed by an infinitive construct. Here, the infinitive construct is followed by a third person masculine plural pronominal suffix. When they see, or during their seeing of a war. Okay? During the sending out of Pharaoh, or during the seeing of the people. Or in normal English, when Pharaoh let the people go, when the people see war. Okay? Bir'otam milchama v'shavu mitzrayma. note the directional kamathe at the end of Mitzrayim. We had it a few weeks ago as well. Towards Mitzrayim. Okay. So what did God do? He led them on this detour. In a detour that would also relate to making them battle ready. Okay. So yes, Anne?
What kind of war was God talking about?
So it's a good question. I think it's related to the question of how we understand this root, the root of the land of the Philistines. It might be related to a war with the Philistines. Okay?
Already then?
Already then? Yeah,
Okay.
you have, okay? You
Is
have,
this the first time Philistine ever appears?
so no, we do have the Philistines in the book of Genesis. Okay?
Okay.
Avimelech is the king of the Philistines in Gerar. There is, however, a good question. Are the Philistines of the book of Genesis the same as the Philistines of the book of Judges or Samuel? Okay, it's a good question, both historically and culturally and geographically, because this route, the route through the land of the Philistines, is more in line with the Philistines of the book of Judges and the book of Samuel, where the Philistines of the book of Genesis is slightly different because of their where we find them. Okay, geographically speaking. So so some have talked about the question of the similarity or difference between the Philistines of the book of Genesis and the Philistines of the book of the later books of the Bible. Yes, and by the way, we have the same for the Hittites. Yeah.
Okay. I remember the archaeologist that you had invited for the special meeting. He was telling that in the area in the Sinai previous or southwest of that southern area where Gaza is today, that the Pharaoh himself had some trading posts.
That is correct.
So it's interesting that it is written here that the eventual war with the Philistines is more important than the trading posts of the Pharaoh.
We have to bear in mind that through that period, there is no like consistency that you can say throughout the whole period something happened, and so we have periods where the Egyptian influences in the land of Canaan increases or decreases, and so it is correct that the area, and specifically the area of Gaza, by the way, was oftentimes kind of an outpost of Egyptian influence. Okay, and when we talk about the root of the land of the Philistines, we're definitely talking about that as well. But we'll finish talking about verse 18, and then we'll see a map, and we'll be able to maybe better understand that. Yes, Frank?
Yes, were the Egyptians at this time at war someplace, up in, Canaan, or, maybe with the Hittites or Arameans at the time, something, Aram?
So this is obviously related to the bigger question of when is the Exodus happening. But the biblical narrative is telling us that they had a war with the people of Israel, right? They try to fight with the Israelites on the sea. Okay, and then they drown. So they do have a war with us, with God, more than us, right? Adonai yilachem lachem va'atem tacharishun. God will fight for you and you will keep silent. Okay, so that is a war that we know from the Bible. We do know that Egypt, and we've talked about it in the previous weeks, but in regards to much later periods, there is maybe almost always a struggle between the powers of the ancient Near East, and Israel is the bridge between the Asia and Africa in a sense. And we'll see the map next slide, and then we'll be able to mention some of these more famous empires and powers that had that friction with Egypt, when Egypt is in fact the more consistent side, and the empires of the ancient Near East kept changing. So we'll see that in the next slide. So Wayyassēb Elohim et ha'am derech hamidbar Yam Suf. So Wayyassēb Elohim, we go back to the main narrative, to the Wayyiqtol, that tells us a good biblical story. God turned the people, made them turn. Wayyassēb, the root is samech bet bet, what we call the geminate, or the and here in the causative, in the Hiphil, third person masculine singular, God made them make a detour. Okay, after making that parenthetical remark in the previous verse, now we go back to the narrative. God took them around, made a circle with them, did not take the straight path, but rather made them take a detour through the Midbar Yam Suf. Okay, wilderness at the sea of reeds, Yam Suf, and then V'Ḥămušîm alu b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, related to the talking about war. Okay, so the people of Israel were equipped for war, and yet God did not want them to see war because he was afraid that they would return to Egypt once seeing war. Remember, they just had that consideration a few verses ago when they said, or a few verses ahead rather, when they say, Nitena rosh v'nashuva mitzrayma, let us all return, set direction and return to Egypt, when they see the Egyptians following them. Right? Because we're talking about mentality of a people who were slaves. Okay? And when you're so much used to a certain way of life, it's very hard to make that change in your mind. Okay? It's sometimes easier to free one's body than one's soul, one's mind. And it's very interesting that God is delivering the people of Israel from Egypt. In a sense, God is taking their physical bodies out of Egypt, but God is not intervening in the same way with their minds. God could have said, okay, so what? But it is very rare for God to intervene in these ways. Again, going back to a discussion we had last week about the Egyptian culture and the heavy heart of Pharaoh. Why should Pharaoh be punished if God made his heart heavy, if God made him sin? The question of free will and the way in which God interacts with people in the biblical narrative. right? Even though God is omnipotent, he is not directing people's decisions most of the time. So even though they had the weapons, God did not make them go through the route of the land of the Philistines, even though it's near. So what is this way of the land of the Philistines that we've encountered here? Derech Eretz Pelishtim is what is known as Via Maris in historical and geographical research. Okay, the Egyptians called it the way of Horus. Okay, and those fortresses that you've mentioned were found along this route of Via Maris, the way of the sea, the way, and you can see here on screen some of these points, some of these routes. This is a very, very common route in those wars of Egypt that Frank, you asked about before. You can see when you look at the accounts of the Egyptian pharaohs telling us where they visited when they campaigned going to the land of Canaan, you look at biblical sources as well, and you look at other sources, and you look at archaeology, you see that the Via Maris here in blue, okay, just a second, the way that is near the sea, okay, this way, including Gaza and Ashdod and Jaffa, Yafo, and other locations along the road going north. Okay, this is the road of the sea. Okay, the way through the land of the Philistines, Via Maris. It's all the same thing. And excavations through this route way reveal the chain of Egyptian positions, forward stations, commercial stations, fortresses along the northern coast of Sinai and along the coastal region of Israel. Okay, so the Sinai Peninsula and the land of Canaan. Okay, so basically God is leading them to avoid direct conflict and collision with possibly Egyptian positions on that route, and possibly other people that are occupying that area. And God is taking them, leading them to this detour, so to avoid their direct connection with the battle, because we are changing that generation of the people who left Egypt with the generations of people who are born in the desert. And this way we get 40 years in the desert, and the people who are entering Israel are not the same people who left Egypt. Okay? With few exceptions. But essentially, God is saying the people who went out are not going to be the people who come in. And we also have a new covenant, right? When the people leave Egypt, they circumcise. When the people come into the land of Israel, I should say they do two things, right? One of them is obvious, that's the Passover. So there is the blood covenant of the Paschal Lamb, and there is the blood covenant of the circumcision, and both of them are reenacted upon entering Israel. Different generation, renewal of that covenant by both these means. Okay, so that's the first two verses. And Zohar, you had your hand up.